Welcome, everyone. On behalf of my colleagues on the Federal Communications Commission, I welcome you to this field hearing of the FCC on energy and the environment, part of our broadband process. I'm Julius Janikowski. I'm the chairman of the FCC, and it is a particular pleasure to be here at MIT. I want to begin by thanking MIT and the MIT Energy Initiative for hosting us today. It's great for me personally to be back. My dad went here at MIT studied mechanical engineering, and has been a real inspiration to me all of my life, and focused on an element of the communications landscape when he was here, trying to develop technologies that would help blind people read words on paper, not completely dissimilar to the device that Intel announced last week. I saw my father over the weekend, and he promised that he would forswear any patent claims that he might have. A little bit of background, if I could set the stage. We have a great panel, a very important topic, and I want to make sure that Congressman Markey and commissioners and my fellow commissioners have a chance to welcome you all as well. The Recovery Act adopted by Congress several months ago included broadband as part of the recovery and reinvestment plan for the country, and also recognized that the country finally needed a broadband plan. 22 countries already have broadband plans. The world is not standing still. There's a broad recognition of the importance of broadband as an essential infrastructure for opportunity and prosperity broadly. In the Recovery Act, Congress asked us to do three things in terms of developing a plan. One was focus on deployment issues. There's a significant portion of the country that couldn't get broadband even if they wanted to, and item one was to develop a plan to tackle that. Second item was to look at affordability and adoption. In the country, the non-adoption rate for people who could have broadband is around 35%. In certain communities, it's much higher than that, almost double. Low-income, minority communities, the elderly, rural communities. And third, Congress said, as part of our national broadband plan, let's make sure we address the ways in which broadband can advance national purposes that are so important for the country, like education, like healthcare, like public safety, and specifically in the statute, energy independence and efficiency. And that's what brings us here today. We're on the cusp, we're in the early innings of two revolutions that are related to each other. One is the broadband revolution. The second is the energy revolution, fundamentally transforming homes, communities, businesses, with great opportunity to accelerate a lot of important benefits for the country, including around energy efficiency and independence. Smart grid is something we'll be hearing a lot about today. Smart grid and broadband are first cousins. I think we'll hear a lot today about the familial relationships between the two of them. We'll hear about smart grid, and not just smart grid, but smart homes, smart cities, smart cars, smart trucks. All of these need to be part of a solution to energy independence and efficiency in our country. We'll hear, I hope, about the opportunities from telecommuting. I read this morning that broadband-enabled telecommuting could save as much as $20 to $40 billion annually by 2020 if we get the country's policy right. We'll hear about consumer information around energy, the importance of enabling consumers to visualize energy use, the importance of applications and services that can tie together a smart infrastructure with people at home or at businesses who are making decisions about how and when to use energy devices. As I mentioned, we'll have a chance to hear from my colleagues. I want to introduce Congressman Markey, but before I do, I want to thank the members of the FCC staff who worked so hard to bring this hearing together. This is one of about 40 plus hearings and workshops that the FCC has done since August around broadband at the Commission on a variety of topics, and also in communities around the country. Each of these takes a great deal of work, and we have a fantastic staff at the FCC. Roger Goldblatt, who oversees our hearings and workshops and somehow manages to pull each one off wherever they are, no matter how little notice we give him. He has a terrific team that's here. I'm looking for them now, but I thank you all for your work. Nick Sinai is a member of our broadband team focusing on energy, and I don't see him now, but he worked very hard on pulling this together. None of us would be here if not for the person I'd like to recognize now, the Dean of the New England Congressional Delegation, Chairman Ed Markey. Chairman Markey is known to us at the FCC. For over 2 decades, he's been a legislative giant in the communications sector, from the Telecom Act of 1996, the Cable Act of 1992, Children's Television Act, the first auctions of wireless spectrum, to landmark work as one of the prime sponsors of the E-rate provision, which is responsible for linking America's classrooms and libraries. I'm actually going to pause on that for a minute because while we have statistics around broadband that for the country are troubling, there is an area that's a shining example of success in our country. And that is the fact that over 95% of our schools are connected to the internet. That is the result of the country having a plan. And that's related to Congressman Markey and Senator Rockefeller and Senator Snowe and others insisting on a plan to connect classrooms in the late 1990s. We went from 3% of schools connected in the early 1990s to over 95% connected by the end of the decade. We have new challenges now. Schools and classrooms are connected, but more than half teachers say their speeds are too slow. And so we're looking at that as part of our broadband effort as well. The bottom line for us is that not a week goes by where we are not working on something that doesn't have Ed Markey's fingerprints all over it. And so when I say to Chairman Markey that the FCC wouldn't be here in Massachusetts today if it weren't for you, I mean that quite literally. I mean that in all the ways that I've been speaking about. And finally, I mean that because the broadband plan provision of the Recovery Act that has led to this focus on broadband and its future was drafted by Congressman Markey's pen, who fought for its inclusion in the Recovery Act. Ultimately, it was widely supported in Congress and by the administration as well. It's given us a very important responsibility, which we take seriously, as you can see from the turnout we have here today. So, Congressman Markey, thank you for this assignment and the confidence you've placed in all of us. If I could welcome you to come and make a few remarks, I'd appreciate it, and let me join everyone in welcoming you here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and thank you for having this very important hearing here at MIT. We thank President Susan Hockfield for hosting this event today at the epicenter of innovation, which is what MIT represents to our country and to the world. We thank Michael Copps and Commissioner Clyburn and Commissioner Baker for making the trek up here to Boston. We very much appreciate it, and your leadership and vision in creating a new broadband policy for our country. I think it is central to our long-term economic growth, and it is a proxy to a very large extent to how much economic growth our country will have in the long term. I think if you look at the energy sector and you look at the broadband sector, there you can basically determine whether or not a country in this century is going to be successful or not. The kind of economic growth that it is going to be able to enjoy, whether or not it has a vision for its people. Like your father, Mr. Chairman, my father used to come over here too, to MIT. He used to deliver milk for the Hood Milk Company to MIT as I was growing up. And in fact, my science project, sophomore year in high school, as an overachieving sophomore at Malden Catholic with no scientific ability whatsoever, my father took me over to the laboratories at the Hood Milk Company, who were partnering with MIT to develop a new project to remove not just to homogenize and to pasteurize milk, but in 1962 to remove the strontium-90 from the nuclear testing of the US and USSR. So my science project was something that I did in conjunction with the Hood Milk Company and MIT to construct this project. And even though I had no scientific skills whatsoever, my explanation of how my project would save the world from strontium-90 did in fact win an award in my sophomore year. And I don't think it's a coincidence, but just 1 year later, the United States and Soviet Union signed the Atmospheric Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. So that was my early experience. President of MIT, Jerome Wiesner, was the president's science advisor back at that time, which was not lost on any of us. We knew who the president's science advisor was during the Kennedy years. The science advisor was not in a witness protection program, as they have been for the preceding 8 years up until this year. And so now science is back, and for my own purposes here at MIT, Jerome Wiesner in 1977 hosted me over here in my first year as a congressman. And he wanted to explain two separate policies to me. One was an energy policy. I served on the energy subcommittee, and the other was a telecom policy. We had only one telephone company in America with 1.2 million employees, but everyone was still using the same black rotary dial phone that their parents and their grandparents had been using, and renting it for $3 a month every month for their whole life, with a very short cord on it in the hall in your house, so your mother could listen to every conversation which you had. And so that was where we were. And President Wiesner began my pathway to understanding how we could break down these old networks and begin to construct a new way in which we could communicate and generate electricity in our country. The truth is that in 1977, but also until very recently, Thomas Alva Edison would recognize our electricity grid in our country. And Alexander Graham Bell, until very recently, would have recognized the telephone system that he had envisioned. And that was a reflection of how little innovation which had been made, even though Alexander Graham Bell had invented the telephone just about a mile from here. And so that was something that we had to do something about. And so this hearing kind of reflects a merger of these two issues, kind of a recombinant electronic and electron DNA that can be put together to create a new future for all of these issues as both industries work together in order to create a new future for our country. As you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, back in the 1990s, when I was chairman of the Telecommunications Subcommittee, I was able to move through 3 bills. The first bill was the Cable Act of 1992, which created the 18-inch dish satellite industry. The cable industry was not happy, but once that was created, it created an innovation challenge for both industries to move forward. And today we have 30 million Americans that use the satellite dish as an alternative, but it puts pressure to innovate on the cable industry as well. In 1993, I moved over 200 megahertz of spectrum. We only had 2 cell phone companies. They were both analog. They were both charging 50 cents a minute in 1993, which is why no one had a cell phone in their pocket for for all intents and purposes. But by 1996, working with the FCC, we had 4 new licensees. They had all gone digital. They had dropped their price to under 10 cents a minute. The first 2 companies had to move digital and under 10 cents a minute. And today, people can quite comfortably pretend that they're listening to me while they're actually looking at their BlackBerry as I'm giving this speech. And that's something I'm quite proud of, that I was able to give people that option as I am speaking right now. And then the third bill was the 1996 Telecom Act. It actually was the Telecom Act of 1994. It was filibustered in the Senate, but after it passed, finally in 1996, we then had a broadband revolution. Not one home in America had broadband in February of 1996. Not one home in America had broadband as President Clinton signed the Telecom Act of 1996. But inside of that legislation, we created massive, Darwinian, paranoia-inducing competition in the marketplace, in the same way that we had done so in the Spectrum and in the Cable Act of 1992. And we were off to the races, creating this capacity which makes it possible for us to now talk about how the broadband revolution can be partnered with the energy revolution to really dramatically change the relationship between both technologies and the American people. And so within a 10-year period from 1996 on, we created a whole new vocabulary in our country. Google, eBay, Amazon, Hulu, YouTube, thousands of other companies, 1.5 to 2 million new jobs in our country, many thousands of them here in Massachusetts. And now we have a chance to do the same thing again, a second revolution that actually then builds upon what happened in that first telecom revolution in the 1990s. And there, after Speaker Pelosi was sworn in January of 2007, she asked me if I would chair a select committee on energy independence and global warming. I had served on the energy committee for the preceding 30 years at that point, and the telecom committee as well. And so there we put together 3 bills to be able to work on the issues that we are discussing here today as well. In the 2007 energy bill that we passed, my amendment finally was enacted to increase the fuel economy standards of the vehicles which we drive from 25 to 35 miles per gallon. That was a huge revolution. We had actually gone backwards from 1987. That then put an emphasis, of course, increasingly on plug-in hybrids, on all-electric vehicles, because the higher the standards go, is the more that all of the companies have to look at newer alternative ways of providing transportation for the American people. And the law also initiated standards for the smart grid technology and dedicated millions of dollars to demonstration projects in that 2007 bill. In 2009 Recovery Act, as the chairman made reference, we invested $80 billion, that's just in February of this year, in new renewable and efficiency technologies. And included in that was money for the smart grid, $17 billion worth of investment in smart grid technology, so that we could, again, telescope the time frame that it would take in order for us to reach a point where we could talk about a smart grid, which we all know is really nothing more nor less than an electricity internet. Because without the broadband revolution, you cannot have the revolution that we're talking about here. It is an electricity internet that we're talking about, because we're managing the information. We're managing the wind and the solar and the other renewable resources that we're bringing in off of the deserts, off of the prairies, off of the ocean, off of people's roofs. We need a capacity, a telecommunications capacity to manage all of this energy in order to make sure that it can be integrated into the grid within our country. And then finally, the capstone policy that we were able to pass was is the Waxman Markey bill, which Congressman Henry Waxman and I were able to move through the Congress on June 26th of 2009. And this piece of legislation is the most wide-ranging, sweeping piece of energy and environment legislation in the history of our country. It is the equivalent of the 1996 Telecom Act. And now, as the President heads towards Copenhagen, we're seeing momentum build in the Senate, led by Senator Kerry and Senator Boxer and others, to move towards implementation at the Senate level of the same kind of legislation so that it can be sent to the President's desk. And we saw just in the last week President Obama promising that he was going to commit to a 17% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2020 and make that promise in Copenhagen, and that's the number that we have inside of the Waxman-Markey legislation. So this is an incredible revolution. Massachusetts is at the forefront of it. We have Secretary Bowles, who is here with us today, and he has testified before the Select Committee as we were moving forward on the legislation, as is the chairman of the Department of Energy Resources. Okay, and we thank both of you for testifying before the committee. So this Grid 2.0 is really the revolution. We cannot have 20% of our electricity come from renewables unless we have Grid 2.0. We need an assist from Grid 2.0 if we are to accommodate 20 million electric vehicles on our highways. We need an assist from Grid 2.0 if we are to realize the massive potential of energy efficiency. We need to ensure that we have implemented all of these policies so that it gives an assist to everything else that we are trying to do within our society. My mother always used to say to me, Eddie, I'm going to donate your brain to Harvard Medical School as a completely unused human organ. And she would always say that immediately after saying that I had to learn how to work smarter, not harder. Well, while our electricity grid has been working hard, too hard, trying to manage the 1 million megawatts that we have here in the United States, 25% of the entire capacity for the world. We need a smart grid that can ensure that that 1 million megawatts is actually used in a way which is smarter and not harder. And so this new way in which we look at it is dependent upon the Federal Communications Commission. Colin Crowell, who is with me here today, not any longer after 20 years on my staff, but now working for you, Mr. Chairman, and for the Federal Communications Commission. He and I, back in January, wrote into the recovery package the requirement that the Federal Communications Commission had to put together a broadband plan for our country. So I wrote that language in order to accomplish that goal. And that one-year deadline is meant to ensure that we focus upon this issue, so that we guarantee that we all understand what the goal is for our country. We put $17 billion into the stimulus program for the grid and for transmission modernization programs. And we, as well, made it possible for us to begin to talk not just about iPhones, but iFridges as well, because we built in this mandate as well for e-chips, okay, smart devices out there. So in the same way that I called the program that would wire each classroom the E-rate program for education rate, I called in the legislation this program to make sure that all the devices in our country be able to be communicated with in a way that can reduce the overall energy consumption that they are engaging in an e-chip program, reflecting how these two issues are now coming together. And so just by naming them, I think we kind of create a new sense of direction for our country. So the legislation that Mr. Waxman and I have been able to move through has a smart grid labeling program in it, working from the Energy Star framework, so customers can identify products with smart grid capabilities. There is a peak demand reduction program, which would use smart grid technologies to respond to market signals. There are credits for companies reducing the loss of electricity transmission lines, thereby encouraging the smart grid deployment. And there's a program integrating plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles into a smart grid. So there's no question that we're living in difficult times. But if we're looking for a pathway out of these difficult times and to a brighter future, it's looking at the energy and broadband sectors. And it's trying to find a role for our country. What is the role for the 4% of the population, which is in the United States, compared to the other 96% in the world? Well, I would say that Massachusetts, through Governor DeVal Patrick, the people who he's named to these important positions in his government, has identified it. We don't see ourselves as the Bay State any longer. We are the brain state. And that's our signature. That's how we're going to continue to find and generate opportunities for new job creation in the future. The same thing is true for our country. We have to be the brain country. And what the Federal Communications Commission is doing, what all of you are participating in, is the construction of this revolutionary way of viewing who we are and what we have to do. So, so I think that if we do it correctly, because of the smart grid, children by 2050, this debate that we're having about greenhouse gases, that we'll solve it. We're going to solve it. And the smart grid is going to play a big role in it. And we don't have an option. The glaciers are melting. The coral reefs are dying. We have to just ask ourselves, basically, did we try? Did we really try to solve that problem? Can we actually, instead of thinking about the horrific consequences in 2050, instead envision in 2050 children having to look to a history book to find that there ever was such a thing as global warming? Well, what this commission is presently considering is at the heart of the solution. It's using technology to solve this problem. And so it's my great honor to be here to welcome the Federal Communications Commission. I wish that Jerome Wiesner could be here to see how all of these issues have come together in a perfect synergy. And I don't think you can have a smarter group of people or a more committed group of people to partnering with the Commission to solving this problem. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all the rest of the commissions for being here, commissioners, and all of you as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Markey, for honoring the FCC by choosing to be here today. And thank you for contributing Colin Kroll to the FCC, very important part of our efforts across the board. And thank you for your leadership on these two interrelated areas of importance, broadband and energy. Thank you very much. Before we turn to Secretary Bowles and our panel, let me invite my colleagues on the Commission for opening remarks. First, Commissioner Michael Copps.
Thank Thank you very much. Is this on? Let's see. Can you hear me? I am delighted to be here in the Brain State, and I want to thank MIT for its hospitality, our distinguished panelists for being here to share their wisdom, and most of all, my friend Ed Markey, and thank him once more for the leadership that he has brought over so many years. He is at the epicenter of what we're talking about today. All things energy, all things telecommunications move through him, and it's lucky for both of them that they do. So I think his brand of visionary leadership, the practical judgment that he brings to getting things done, and the eloquence with which he states everything that he does is a wonderful national treasure, and I'm just grateful for the not just the cooperation but the friendship that I'm privileged to have with Ed. This is a fascinating intersection of communications and energy policy if we can just get everybody to meet at that intersection. And that really is the challenge, which will demand a degree of collaboration and cooperation that we don't always get. But if we don't manage to bring it off, we really shortchange the technology opportunity we have right now. We really shortchange broadband. Broadband is the great enabler. I can't think of a major challenge that this country faces right now, whether it be in energy or climate change or health care or education or you name it, that does not have broadband as part of its solution. There is none. Broadband is just integral to all of these things. All of that seems increasingly obvious now, but here I hope we're going to address today the challenge of how to turn that vision into reality. And that vision comes with a host of questions and a host of challenges. What's it all going to cost? If there are savings to be garnered, and there are doubtless many savings, how do we ensure that those savings get passed along to consumers? What are the spectrum needs of smart energy policies, and do they ride on new or developing commercial networks? What kinds of standards are needed to make all of this work, and who will develop and implement those standards? What kind of regulatory regime is appropriate here, and how do we ensure the degree of government and interagency cooperation so that government the public sector can do its part? What role should the states play? Every state has a public utilities commission that's involved in telecommunications, and most of them in energy too. Great resources there. And then how do we get utilities and communications companies, and they are not always noted for their competitive verve or lust for innovation or commitment to research and development or positive consumer-friendly outreach. How do we make sure those industries are operating in this high-tech, dynamic, consumer-friendly climate in which they're going to have to operate in order to bring this vision to reality? Because if they don't, if we can't do all of these things, answer all of these questions I've just mentioned, then we're not going to get there. So those are some of the questions that I bring with me today, and I will be looking forward to discussing them. And again, I thank everybody for their hospitality, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Cox. If this is on, we'll figure it out. But Commissioner Clyburn, please.
Thank you. Since I am the most vertically challenged up here, I decided to get up. Right, Mr. Chair? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm looking forward to, that's what we say down south, looking forward to participating in today's field hearing, focusing on two significant aspects of our upcoming national broadband plan: the relationship of providing universal broadband to energy policy and the environment. I have a keen interest in energy and environmental issues because of my involvement for over a decade on energy policy at the state level. As a commissioner in South Carolina, I witnessed firsthand the importance of modernizing our nation's approach to energy. I firmly believe that our communications infrastructure is an essential part of accomplishing that goal. I also firmly believe that to design a sound national broadband plan that advances energy independence and efficiency, and in order to successfully execute that plan, we need innovative ideas and effective collaboration from all key stakeholders. These stakeholders include federal, state, and local government, the communications and energy industries, and most importantly, the consumers. That is why I'm pleased to see that this field hearing includes Representative of Congress with the Honorable Ed Markey, my friend, remember that, and representatives of state government, such as Secretary Ian Bowles of the Commonwealth, as well as FCC commissioners, members of the academic community, industry representatives, and everyday energy consumers. Because innovative ideas and effective collaboration among stakeholders are so vital to a successful national broadband plan, MIT is perhaps the best forum for hosting this particular field hearing. This institution has a well-established legacy for developing technologies of the future and serving as a training ground for some of our best and brightest scientific and technological minds. In fact, over the past few years, MIT has shown tremendous leadership in fostering collaboration in the areas of energy independence and environment protection. This world-renowned institution has also shown just how much can be accomplished with innovation and effective collaboration. During her inauguration speech in May of 2005, President Susan Hockfield announced that MIT would begin an energy initiative that would require input from all parts of the educational community. Tackling the problems that energy and the environment present will require contributions from all of our departments and schools, she explained, bringing scientists, engineers, and social scientists together to envision the best energy policies for the future. In just a few years, MIT's energy initiative has developed to the point where it is collaborating with industry leaders and providing seed funding for more than 50 proposals. I commend President Hockfield and MIT for providing stellar leadership on solving energy and environmental issues, and I thank all of you for your generosity in hosting this field hearing. I am eager to hear from our distinguished panelists this afternoon. Over the past few months, as a part of the National Broadband Plan proceedings, the Commission has held workshops and released public notices to seek comment on the potential impacts on broadband on energy, the environment, and transportation. The comments filed in these proceedings have emphasized the importance of both the topics that our panelists will discuss, smart grid communications and energy information economy. The record in the Commission's National Broadband Plan proceedings demonstrates how smart grid technologies can create new jobs, increase network performance and reliability, and advance new environmentally friendly technologies. At the Commission, we are very interested in hearing more about how advanced infrastructure and services could help achieve efficient implementation of smart grid technologies. We have also learned how broadband applications are allowing businesses and consumers to take a more active role in energy efficiency initiatives. And American businesses and citizens have indeed taken action by buying efficient light bulbs, installing solar panels on roofs, weatherizing their homes, replacing gas-guzzling cars with more fuel-efficient vehicles, and much, much more. Companies like those represented on the second panel and in the technology showcase session, say that fast, are able to present in real time a home's energy consumption. Access to this data is leading residents to alter their habits. In some cases, this has resulted in as much as a 15% reduction in energy consumption. I look so forward to hearing more about how we at the FCC can promote more innovation, entrepreneurship, and investment to meet our nation's goal of reduced energy consumption and environment protection. As Chairman Markey has said, we don't have an option. Thank you and good afternoon.
Commissioner Baker?
Thanks so much. I just want to join my colleagues in thanking MIT and the broadband team and the chairman for bringing us here to Massachusetts, great state, great Commonwealth. We're very lucky to be joined by Chairman Markey and Secretary Bowles. Thank you both for being here. I'm going to skip opening statements because I think we have a really impressive panel. We have some great exhibitors out there, and I'm ready to learn. So thank you all for putting it together, and I look forward to it.
Let me briefly acknowledge the wealth of experience that we have at the FCC among the commissioners. My colleagues didn't talk about their backgrounds, but in Commissioner Copps we have someone who not only has been at the FCC as a leader for a very long time, but who worked in the Commerce Department, including on international issues, international trade. Commissioner Clyburn was on a state public utility commission before coming to the FCC. Commissioner Baker ran the NTIA, the lead communications agency in the Commerce Department. It's reflected now in our staff. I mentioned Nick Sinai. I didn't mention that we stole him from here in Massachusetts, where he was working for one of the lead venture capital firms. We're looking actually to drain as much brain as we can from Massachusetts. Colin, Nick Sinai, the chief of our wireline bureau, who just started about a month ago, Sharon Gillette, had been the telecom regulator here in Massachusetts, the head of the telecom agency, and also studied here, and I believe was on the faculty of MIT as well. We're working very hard to take advantage of the incredible staff at the FCC and to supplement it with people from a broad range of experiences so that we can tackle the broad range of challenges that the communications sector has, given its relationship to energy, education, health, public safety, and all these other issues. Let me introduce now, very happily, Secretary Ian Bowles. I'd like to ask you please to come up and speak before we turn to the panel. Secretary Bowles is the Secretary of Environmental Affairs of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, overseeing 6 state environmental, natural resources, and energy regulatory agencies. Secretary Bowles has more than 20 years of experience in energy and the environment, including service as Associate Director in the White House Council on Environmental Quality, as Senior Director of the Global Environmental Affairs Directorate at the National Security Council, where he coordinated American foreign policy on global climate change. We appreciate you joining us today, Secretary Bowles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I know you have a panel you want to hear from. Let me just say thank you to my friend Ed Markey, who was an amazing partner for us. A lot of the challenge of what he and Chairman Waxman were doing was trying to figure out how to get the other 80% of America to do what places like Massachusetts have been struggling with for the last 15 years, and really did an amazing job, Ed did, in terms of striking the balance between how do you support and sustain and accelerate state programs that make sense, and how do you overlay some new federal mandates when they make sense. And so he's been a great partner, and I thank him for his leadership and hard work, and also thank MIT, who's an amazing partner for us in the Commonwealth. They obviously bring a huge amount of leadership, as well as producing more intellectual property on energy technology than anyone else. And they're a great partner for us and very public-minded. In fact, they're a partner with us in the groundbreaking tomorrow for the new federally chartered wind turbine test center that'll be looking at how you test the durability of the largest wind blades in the world that will get to 90 meters long, literally almost a football field, and that's being built about a mile from here in the shadow of the Tobin Bridge in Charlestown. And so MIT's been a terrific partner, and we thank them. Massachusetts, for those who are in the energy industry and haven't checked in a while, probably best known for its strong commitment to competitive energy markets. We were one of the first and most robust restructuring of the energy markets, contrary to the idea that our state is heavy on regulation. We're probably the least regulated energy market, and ISO New England, our partners around New England, have really promoted and expanded competitive energy markets. And and that was really done in our state in 1997. And what Governor Patrick has done since taking office 3 years ago, with a vision of clean energy as a major economic opportunity for the state, seeing places like MIT, highest educational attainment in the nation, here in Massachusetts, a strong, robust venture capital community, and a huge entrepreneurial ecosystem with companies like A123 going public and raising a tremendous amount of money, and a lot of terrific clean energy companies starting here. Seeing that combined with high, rising, and volatile fossil fuel prices, the dependence on foreign oil, the greenhouse gas imperative in front of us, really seeing all those factors as a major economic opportunity
opportunity for a state, and he's really made that a core part of his economic strategy. And so building on what was done in 1997, what we've done in the last few years is really, in many ways, a second energy restructuring, where we are further modifying the energy landscape to really put energy efficiency and renewable power, clean power, at the core of our energy policy. We've done a broad range of things. The DPU has issued a landmark decoupling order. We've adopted a least cost procurement framework in our state for energy efficiency, new advanced building codes, doubled the rate of requirement on the utilities through the renewable portfolio standard, and really contrary to the idea that was debated somewhat at the national level that, you know, these state level mandates, they haven't worked. And that's really not backed by facts. In our state, we're in our third year in a row of surplus in the renewable energy markets, so we're well ahead of what the mandate on the utilities is. So that was doubled by the legislature. Long-term contracts requirements in the utilities that they start financing renewable power in our state in a more proactive way. A comprehensive ocean planning to figure out where in our state waters we want to put renewable power. Advanced biofuels mandates, including being the only state in the country where we've got a tax incentive for cellulosic, advanced cellulosic ethanol. Many other things were really changed here, and a lot of that is meant to change the landscape for the utilities. I think in National Grid, which is a company that is now starting to compensate their executives based on greenhouse gas performance, you're seeing some quite forward-minded thinking out of utilities. That is not universal. We also have some fat, dumb, and happy utilities who are giving their customers not much in the way of intelligent choices that help them to embrace an energy efficient future. And in many ways, our utilities are, using Ed's analogy, they are the black rotary phone that you had in your grandmother's kitchen, and we really need to move towards the BlackBerry devices that we all use. Just a couple other results I'd mention. Energy efficiency now pending before our DPU is a $2 billion energy efficiency plan, 3-year, $2 billion of investment from sources like our proceeds from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, where we're selling greenhouse gas permits, third-party financing, as well as ratepayer funds. That plan is meant to produce $6.5 billion in net savings for consumers. Just for a point of comparison, that is on per capita investment 3 or 4 times what our friends in California are doing. So last year, the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy rated Massachusetts as number 7. This year, they've rated us as number 2. And our message to our friends in California is I hope they enjoy their brief time in last year at number 1 as we blow past them. And in the renewable energy area, a couple data points for you in terms of results. We will, by the end of next year, under 4 years under Governor Patrick, have built, installed, and operating 15 times more solar power than when we took office, getting up over 50 megawatts through some pretty simple changes in terms of net metering, repurposing existing funds for a rebate. We're seeing doubling the amount of solar employment in the state, 4 times more solar installers coming in to Massachusetts. In terms of wind, we'll be at 10 times more wind installed and operating than when we took office. So part of the message is this is not that complicated. You have to clear away some of the barriers that have been in places, and you have to realign your priorities to get it done. But I think a lot of the hand-wringing that stands in the way of or purports to stand in the way of historic legislation, such as what Chairman Markey has passed successfully in the House, doesn't bear out when you actually look at the facts and the experience at a state like ours. Finally, I just mentioned that we are today already back down at 1990 levels in terms of greenhouse gas emissions in Massachusetts. The state law of the land, and in some areas I look forward to federal preemption because the end of our interstate deals have been very difficult, like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, but we're on a glide path to between 10 and 25% below 1990 levels. And in fact, we have a mandate we're going to set by the end of next year of the legal requirement for our 2020 target. But the law of the land here it already is that we'll be at 80% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So we've done a lot in the state. You'll hear from Phil Giudice, who we recruited out of being a demand response entrepreneur at Enernoc, where he was with promises of a 95% pay cut and daily hassles, and he's been we've been very lucky to have him, and you'll hear more about some of our state policies from Phil. But I thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, for hearing from us, and I hope you have a most productive hearing. Thank you.
Well, let's turn to our first panel. Let me set it up, and then I'm going to do is move the podium out of the way so that we can try to have some dialogue this way. Logistics. We're going to ask each of the panelists to speak for 5 minutes. We're going to ask Roger to keep the clock because some people on the second panel need to start and finish according to schedule. Roger, there's a mechanism for people to submit questions, yes? Great. And are we taking questions online too? Okay, so we're going to try to take as many questions as we can from the audience here and online. I think the theme we've heard so far is that broadband is a key part of the solution to so many challenges the country faces: job creation, economic opportunity, global competitiveness, education, health, public safety, and very much energy. The first panel we have is focused on smart grid communications, just so we can anticipate the second one. The second one will be focused on broadband and the energy information economy. Let me briefly introduce the members of our panel, and then we'll go in turn and then open it up for questions. Peter Brandian is VP for System Operations of ISO New England. Prior to joining ISO New England in 2004, he spent 17 years at Northeast Utilities, most recently as Director of Transmission Operations. Phil Giudice, Commissioner of the Massachusetts Division of Energy Resources, a geologist by training with over 30 years of experience in the energy sector. Dr. Gerald Grosho, research affiliate here at the MIT Energy Initiative and retired VP of Information Services and Technology, MIT. A very long, distinguished, impressive background, including involvement with MIT's first use of ARPANET, of course, the predecessor of the Internet. And finally, Bruce Walker, VP of Asset Strategy and Policy at National Grid, which we heard a little bit about before. We will do this alphabetically. So Peter Brandian, please let's start.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Peter Brandian, ISO New England. I'm the Vice President of System Operations at ISO New England. In ISO New England, for those that don't know, we're a not-for-profit regional transmission organization. We are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and we're responsible for the real-time operations of the power system. We also administer and oversee the wholesale power markets. We are one of a number of RTOs across the country and in Canada, and about 2/3 of the United States and more than 50% of Canada is under markets run by the ISO RTOs. And we're a user of a lot of the data that Smart Grid would bring in for us. You hear a lot about Smart Grid, and when I think about Smart Grid, it's really the integration of existing technology we have out at the utility substations and the generating plants. We pull a lot of data, bring it back to ISO New England or other control centers to make decisions on how to operate the power system. We hear a lot about new technologies that are out there, synchro phasers, things along those lines. The amount of data that would be brought in with these new devices as compared to what's out there today. We're talking about the older devices bringing things, you know, once every 10 seconds, once every 20 seconds, once a minute, to maybe 30 samples a second. So significantly more amount of information that allows us to more efficiently operate the power system. There is quite an extensive communication network out there today with all this increased traffic with data. You know, what is the communication infrastructure that needs to be out there for the smart grid, and the amount of players that we would be polling and bringing information back from would be significant. And the tools that the operators use today in the control room, the information technology that we have available, how do we integrate that, make decisions, and make better utilization of the assets? So smart grid, what's the objectives? You know, from a reliability perspective, can we better utilize the existing infrastructure out there? Better asset management perspective. Can we switch load around? to prevent having to run more expensive generation in places. What are the tools that we need for that? If we're able to make better decisions real time in the operations of the system, giving me more time to redispatch the system, maybe I don't have to bring on the less efficient generators to be able to maintain the reliability of the system, integrating all the renewables, the wind resources, things along those lines. How can I do that efficiently to be able to meet the objectives of the environmental policies and reduce the greenhouse gases? And how do we make the power system transparent? We heard a lot of that from the opening remarks today. How do we let the consumers understand what's going on out there on the power system so that they can make informed choices on when to utilize electricity? Today, we really chase the demand. There's not a lot of feedback to the customers. The load goes up, we chase it, we bring on the generation, we build generation to meet the demand. There's a lot of opportunity out there today, and you'll hear that on the second panel, on being able to operate the system more efficiently and meet a lot of the environmental policies and better utilize the existing infrastructure that's out there today. You know, the communication out there today is mostly from the utility substations back to us at ISO New England. How can we better utilize that? You know, the players on the distribution system and the customers, a lot more people compared to what we're communicating with today. And how do we bring that information back and make the decisions that we need? All of it is doable, but we have to think about, you know, region-wide operations and the planning of the system, how to integrate all this new technology, how to put the infrastructure in the proper places so that we could maintain the reliability of the system. How do we get that information to the consumers, from the consumers? Standardization of the technology out there. We can't continuously implement different technologies. We really need to be able to standardize and communicate with everybody. And then there's the cybersecurity aspect. We really have to ensure that the system's not going to get hacked into and that we could maintain the reliability of the system. That should be on everybody's forefront as we're utilizing the new technologies out there today. So with that, let's end my remarks.
Phil Giudice, is that up for now?
Yes, that's great. Thank you. And I'll just, as the slides are loading up, the department I run is the Department of Energy Resources, and our mission is all about a greener energy future, both environmentally and economically. And as Chairman Markey indicated, we take this very seriously here in this state, and Secretary Bowles laid out some of the programs that we have underway to really make that happen. First and foremost, it's about energy efficiency, and there's a lot of things that need to be done to maximize the energy efficiency, eliminate the waste in our current practices. Second, we foster as much renewable resources as we can get into the system as quickly as we can. Third, we've got to assure a safe and reliable and cost-competitive supplies of energy. And then fourth, we're all about trying to grow both clean energy companies and the jobs that go with them. So this environmental challenge that we're facing isn't just about, you know, good ideas from an emission standpoint. It's actually a good idea from our economy standpoint. And Massachusetts, as you see on this chart here, is actually creating $200 of gross state product for every million BTUs of energy we consume. As you see, we're the third most energy efficient state in terms of being able to squeeze the most economic output out of our BTUs of energy. And this trend has actually accelerated over the decades we have numbers to show it. So this isn't just an energy challenge, it's really very much an economy challenge, and it's not sacrificing our economy to deal with this, it's actually growing it. We have been doing energy efficiency programs in Massachusetts for decades, literally 30+ years running continuously. And these programs are generating enormous amounts of savings from those programs. This chart shows on the bottom the generation of electricity and the delivery of that by our investor-owned utilities. It's about 50 million megawatt hours a year right now. And then the top part of the chart, the layers on top of it, are all of the the programs that we have put in place over the years and the life actual experience of those programs in terms of the energy efficiency that has been saved by those programs. And so right now we're meeting about 10% of our energy needs from energy efficiency, and the new plans that Secretary Bowles spoke of has us on a plan where we will be meeting 25% of our energy needs from energy efficiency by 2020. So very significant experiences in this and very significant growth plans as we go forward. Efficiency is one big part. The second part is renewables, and renewables are really different kind of resource from the traditional generation resources that we have had, that the ISOs and the system operators have had to deal with in the past. These are, for the most part, intermittent resources. They are, in fact, affected by weather, and sometimes they're not running when you really need to have them. There are a lot of resources out there, and there's a lot of resources out there that are actually close to load centers that people haven't really exploited, and we in Massachusetts are really moving very hard to exploit all of the close-in resources that we can as quickly as we can. And as Secretary Bowles indicated, we're on track. We have been meeting all of our energy commitments from renewables over the last couple of years, and we're on track to continue doing that with a significant pipeline of new projects that are coming in. But these are coming in, as you would expect, from all over the place. They're distributed near the load centers. They're also in some of our most peripheral areas of our distribution and transmission center, and they wreak real challenges for our system operators to be dealing with this. The remote resources in our distribution system are out there where our distribution system is the weakest. And so as we try and bring on wind intermittent resources, it creates big challenges. But those are some of the major initiatives that we have underway. I want to touch on just 3 more slides here to give you a context of one of the challenges around the smart grid is we have to deal with the problem and the solution that creates tangible benefits for us in the here and now as we're working forward here. This chart shows how many hours a year does it take us to reach our peak demand. And on the bottom of the chart is 100%, so the 8,760 hours. And the vertical on the chart is the peak capacity required to meet this. And you see that first notch right over from the right side there, 1% of the hours, literally 88 hours a year, we need 15% of the capacity of our system to meet those hours. So if we could, in fact, harness the resource out there and communicate reliably with that, enabling it to drop off the load for that 1% of the hours, we wouldn't have to build 15% of the power plant capacity or transmission lines or anything else that's out there. And that is a very interesting and challenge. The company that Secretary Bowles mentioned you're going to be hearing from later, Enernoc, is focused in part on exactly that challenge of meeting that demand. And they're doing it today under the existing grid circumstances. Demand response is in fact becoming over 10% of the resources for the grid for the first time in the system. And this is the most advanced grid in the country as far as welcoming in demand resources. And the last chart I wanted to touch on is the high-priced hours that we have to deal with. And this chart looks at the last several years of the price of electricity in the wholesale market at various hours. And you see there's relatively small number of hours that we're actually at significant prices. The vertical on the chart goes from about 5 cents a kilowatt hour to 10 cents a kilowatt hour, describes almost all of the hours a day. So simply giving real-time pricing to end users doesn't necessarily change the behaviors that we need to get changed. We have to really match this better information with a whole lot more help to really move customers forward and help them make better decisions on their energy challenges. And with that, I'll turn to the next panelist and welcome questions as they come. Which is?
Dr. Groshek.
And Commissioners Kopp, Clyburn, and Baker, Congressman Markey, welcome to MIT. My name is Gerald Grochow, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you today as a member of the MIT Energy Initiative Research Group studying the future of the United States electric grid. My particular focus in this project is cybersecurity, privacy, and related issues. For the past decade, I've been in positions where cybersecurity and information privacy have been my concern and my responsibility, including for the past 6 years until I retired in September as Vice President for Information Services and Technology here at MIT. Prior to coming to MIT, I held senior positions in the private sector as well as consulting for several government agencies. And as the chairman mentioned, early in my career I was involved in planning for the use of the ARPANET at MIT. Since that time, of course, data and communication networks have taken on strategic importance to university research and teaching, as these activities have become complex collaborations among people and computers often located thousands of miles apart and ever more dependent on high-speed transmission of massive amounts of data as well as high-quality audio and video. An example of the impact of broadband communications on these activities is shown in the work of a consortium spearheaded by the government of the Commonwealth and of which MIT and several other Massachusetts-based universities and corporations are part. This consortium will develop a high-performance computer center in western Massachusetts where hydro and wind energy will be more readily available. The computer center will be both energy efficient and green, making use of so-called green computing technology and green energy, and will open up new opportunities in western Massachusetts, both for educational and economic development. Regional broadband optical communication capability, including a system put in place by MIT over the past several years, makes this feasible. Now I am participating in the MIT Future of the Electric Grid study under the leadership of Professors John Kasakian of our Electrical Engineering and Computer Science Department and Richard Schmalensee of MIT's Sloan School of Management, and involving over a dozen researchers from MIT and Harvard. We are 2 months into an 18-month project to identify the key technical and policy challenges that must be addressed if the electric grid is to evolve to enable the energy system in this country to operate efficiently, reliably, and securely despite the new demands that are being placed upon it. An interactive data and communications-driven grid holds great promise for significant energy efficiency and consumer savings. However, the accompanying cybersecurity and privacy issues have been clearly identified as key areas for study and for concern. While we are only at the beginning of our project, there are several comments we can make at this time. First, cybersecurity of the electric grid is not a new concern, and various industry and government organizations have been studying it for several years. However, with new advances in technology, particularly communications technology, concerns continue to mount while solutions are still in the future. Second, it is clear that the future operations of the grid will require significantly more information to flow about the transmission and distribution system itself, as well as between electricity generators and electricity users. Every one of these information flows is a potential source of disclosure and an opportunity to impact critical national infrastructure, our electric system, as well as providing important insights on how we use electricity throughout our economy and in our personal lives. This information has value to those responsible for providing and using electricity for sure, but also to those who have other economic interests, and unfortunately to those who have malicious interests. Third, while the electric grid is evolving ever more rapidly, it will take many years to transition to a grid with near real-time information about supply, demand, and the status of the many components of the system across the country. That evolution will be going on even as we are studying and debating cybersecurity and privacy issues. It is therefore of paramount importance that we plan now for the evolution of our nation's electric grid to limit its vulnerability to information and communication-related outages, and also to respond and recover from outages quickly and with minimal damage to personal or economic activity. This will be a key challenge, and one that the MIT study will address over the coming months. Thank you for coming to MIT to hold this important hearing and for your attention to my remarks. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Oh, sorry, I apologize. Bruce Walker.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm particularly encouraged by Commissioner Combs' comments, as I see each one of those issues he identified as real opportunities for us within the industry. And I look forward to the partnership. So good afternoon. I'm pleased to represent National Grid and the various utilities throughout the United States to provide a perspective as to how advanced infrastructure and services could help achieve the efficient implementation of smart grid. As the Commission correctly anticipates, the nationwide deployment of smart grid technologies are dependent upon the availability of reliable broadband technologies that will facilitate the communication infrastructure necessary to link the end-to-end systems envisioned by the smart grid. We are excited that the Commission has specifically requested comments on the details and complexities associated with the execution of the data-intensive smart grid technologies, and many energy utilities have provided detailed comments addressing the numerous and insightful questions posed by the Commission in this proceeding. Furthermore, we believe that this inquiry is timely and critical as the Commission proceeds to develop a national scheme for the regulation of broadband communication consistent with the objectives of the Broadband Data Improvement Act and coincident with the distribution of billions of dollars awarded under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. Through this focused initiative, we believe the Commission's actions can enhance the deployment and utilization of smart grid technologies throughout the nation, thereby increasing the reliability, efficiency, and security of our country's energy infrastructure while simultaneously providing real opportunity to advance solutions to other national priorities. Specifically, by coordinating the two distinct but interdependent technologies represented by broadband communications and smart grid applications, the Commission can be instrumental in developing comprehensive strategies that leverage the opportunities of each technology to optimize the utilization of resources for the benefit of all stakeholders and customers throughout the nation. Although the nationwide strategy and deployment of smart grid is in its infancy, it is already apparent that the underlying application of smart grid concepts is dependent upon the availability of a reliable and secure broadband communication platform. Today, however, the ubiquitous nature of electric service as compared to the level of service provided by broadband communications presents significant challenges. Consequently, in order to meet certain communication needs, especially in some rural areas throughout the country, energy utilities have developed various solutions to facilitate necessary communications and interactions with energy infrastructure. Although today the execution of these various strategies meets the needs of the utilities and its customers, this uncoordinated approach will not yield the results necessary to realize the potential of smart grid technologies as they are deployed nationwide. Moreover, the vision of smart grid articulated by the Department of Energy, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Congress, and numerous state legislatures cannot be realized if each energy provider is required to develop and execute independent communication strategies. It should be noted that some of the complexities and challenges associated with the conceptual integration of utilities for operating and consistency purposes contemplated in the smart grid are the result of the evolution of vertically integrated energy utilities that develop strategies to meet the needs of its customers within the prescribed service territories for which they were responsible. Today, as we embark on the journey to develop the energy grid of the future, we have an opportunity to develop a comprehensive broadband communication strategy that will encourage and establish consistency, efficiency, and facilitate the effective deployment of a nationwide smart grid. This comprehensive strategy becomes even more important as we consider that utility requirements vary significantly and smart grid applications are rapidly being deployed. Finally, as we continue on this journey, it is clear that the expansiveness of smart grid technologies will continue to evolve and include applications that today we have not even contemplated. Similarly, as we have learned through our many natural disasters experienced throughout the nation over the last decade, in order to effectively operate critical infrastructure to meet the recovery needs of those affected, communication networks must be designed to prioritize the transmission of necessary infrastructure data. Accordingly, the broadband communication strategy necessary to execute the envisioned smart grid will need to anticipate and be able to adapt to the needs of our customers in order to contribute to meeting the national energy and environmental objectives. It is with this consciousness that we respectfully request the Commission to proactively consider the allocation of broadband spectrum necessary to meet the needs anticipated by the smart grid today and in the future. In conclusion, Americans have become largely dependent upon energy and communication technologies, and its existence and functionality is an integral part of our society. Today, we are on the precipice of a journey that will inextricably link these two technologies together and modernize the way we think about and use our resources. The policy decisions that are made by this Commission regarding a national broadband plan will have lasting implications on national interests and policy priorities, including energy independence, efficiency, safety, reliability, and the security of our nation's critical communication and energy infrastructure. As energy utilities actively pursue the deployment of smart grid technologies, we are committed and encouraged to work collaboratively with various stakeholders, including this Commission, to ensure that the envisioned benefits are realized by customers everywhere. While the desires and ambitions of the various stakeholders throughout the United States continues to evolve and coalesce regarding the vast capabilities promised by the evolution to a smarter grid, this Commission is uniquely positioned to develop a comprehensive broadband plan that will lead this nation. We are excited to be partners in developing the present and the future, and will continue to strive to meet the needs of our customers and the nation. We thank you for your leadership in this field and look forward to working collaboratively to develop the smarter grid. Thank you.
Thank you to each of the panelists. I think Roger may be accumulating questions from the audience and the internet, but let me ask my colleagues if they have any questions at this point. Commissioner Copps?
Yeah, a specific question for the last speaker. You mentioned the need for more spectrum. How much spectrum are we talking about? And then a more general question about what your advice would be on how granular or detailed an FCC-generated broadband plan should be when it comes to the energy grid. Should we be opining on such things as whether you ride on current commercial networks or you build your own new networks and the advantages and disadvantages of each, adoption policy, cybersecurity? How far do you think we should venture into that between now and the 17th of February when our plan is due?
I'm not sure I could answer that very quickly, but I'll take a shot. So with regard to defining the bandwidth, I'm not sure I'm capable of defining that. However, I think there are a number of opportunities through a number of the collaborative efforts with the DOE and the utilities, and also I think the comments that were sent to the Commission from a number of the utilities throughout the United States that actually define a number of those items. I would offer, with regard to, I think, the broader question, probably the one that I think is more pertinent, with regard to how far do you go and how granular do you get, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the Commission here to really set the stage across the United States to facilitate a nationwide smart grid. I noted in my speaking notes that part of where we are today in the utility industry is really a result of the evolution of the utility being responsible for very specific areas. And as being responsible for some very specific areas, or service territories as utilities typically call them, the decisions that were made by utilities were often very provincial because they needed to be. They needed to work with the state regulators, and they needed to really worry about the impact to their customers when defining a result or defining a solution for a problem. And so today, while we sit really on the edge of defining what a broadband strategy would be, I guess I would look back and say, here we are, and we're looking to basically bring smart grid out across the United States. And if we're looking to establish some level of consistency throughout the United States, then the opportunity we have is to help define what that is and to put the box around it and have utilities who are still going to be under state regulatory jurisdictions be able to work through some of the details, much like the Congressman had spoken about with regard to you define the initiatives that are going to be there and you create the burning platform. And so if that is what we're looking to do, and I think we're right on the edge of really making some tremendous change in the industry, then defining the box well is very important. And I think there's tremendous leadership throughout the country in various forms, whether it's NIST, whether it's DOE, whether it's the utilities and the Electric Advisory Committee that the DOE has formed. There are venues to gather the right people to really define what that box looks for. But I think if we miss the opportunity to define this across the nation, then we'll miss the opportunity and we'll be unwinding it, much like we're unwinding the complexities of many of the utilities today that were defined by not having a broad solution.
Does anybody else have a comment on that?
My perspective is that there's a whole spectrum of solutions that is needed here in terms of spectrum. It's not like a one-size-fits-all. There's a lot that we talked about just briefly, and you'll hear from the other panel, that is really going to happen kind of inside the home. There's another set of information that's going to happen kind of between the end user and maybe very locally on almost a street-by-street basis, and that needs one kind of thinking. And then there's another whole set of communication that Pete spoke of that is between substations and the system operators, and that needs a whole different level of thinking about how to make this happen. So I do think that it's appropriate for the FCC to weigh in on this, but not in a lockstep manner, and do it in the context and the awareness, as Bruce was indicating also, of what the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and what NIST is up to, and what North American Electric Reliability Council is up to, some of these other enterprises that are also figuring out their strategies and policies and how these need to interrelate.
Thank you. If I could just build on what Phil said, and I agree with Phil totally on that, but from the operator perspective, the system operator's perspective, and going back to some of Phil's slides, the 15% of the capacity being installed for 1% of the time, and the high prices for a very limited amount of time. When we head in that direction and we're relying on communicating with the load to ensure that we're maintaining the stability of the grid, we just have to ensure that those communication paths are there and they're reliable. And when events start happening on the system, we had the blackout in 2003, August of 2003, that there tends to be a lot of data that starts getting moved around on these networks. And the public networks, a lot of people are jumping on that for voice communications and dialing in. We have to make sure whatever infrastructure is out there is reliable, and that the system operators have access to that and are able to use it during times of significant traffic on those channels.
If I might add just one point, I think the history of both computer and communication technology shows us that we are still in a time of very rapid change. And I don't think that any of us can truly anticipate all of the kinds of communication needs we're going to have with the future electric grid. So having some say on things such as the need for cybersecurity, having an auditable plan for cybersecurity, making sure that privacy regulations that are being enacted both at the state and federal level are taken account of in communications over the electric grid is very important. But specifying specific technologies is probably not the thing to do, just because we are still in the early stages of seeing where that's going.
Thank you.
Doctor, you speak about, both about the presence or the necessity of, in terms of energy-saving technologies and behavioral changes in consumers that, they're necessary in order to achieve any major reductions as it relates to energy consumption on college campuses. My fundamental question is, as it relates to, have you found any energy reduction programs or initiatives on this campus or any other campus that could possibly be transported to larger geographic areas or more diverse communities?
I'm sure there are many such programs we could talk about. I don't want to monopolize the time here on all of the great things going on in the MIT campus.
Your top two.
We have, over the past year, been engaging faculty from several departments, as well as many of our students, in auditing energy use within buildings. And as we know, there is a significant portion of the energy use in this country goes to heating, cooling, lighting, other things related to buildings, and found significant ways in which making use of computer and information technology, we can control certain parts of the usage within that building, but also tied to, as you note, behavioral changes on the part of individuals. So we've been able to reduce energy usage within the buildings where we have studied it, and we think that these are ideas that can be carried much further. A second thing that we have looked at is the amount of energy used by computer technology itself, which has been estimated, I've seen various estimates in the 3 to even as high as 8% range of all energy use. I think these are estimates at best, but the fact is it's very significant. And here we found, again, through a combination of technology, again requiring communications from central servers out to local PCs, that you could reduce energy consumption of computers. And with the cooperation of the people involved, you can further reduce energy consumption, making sure that people are not leaving screensavers, for example. Here's my pitch: don't leave your screensaver on, it just takes up energy on your computer. But again, this is something that can be expanded much more broadly.
I'm sorry, I also have a question for Dr. Grochow. You've been speaking about, and it's good because I'm very concerned about the cybersecurity of the 3G networks as we move forward. So as you talk about sort of with your experience with the internet, as well as with the electric grids, are there mutual standards? Are there lessons learned from the past that we can carry forward?
I think there are a number of lessons learned, and one of the key lessons, I think, is that you have to protect data at the source. So all of the firewalls that we talk about to protect our computers are trying to close a door. But in fact, if we can take steps to encrypt information before it even leaves the computer, before it goes onto the communication networks, we can do a lot better in terms of protecting where we are. Most of the firms that I've looked at that are developing devices for the future electric grid are certainly well aware of this. I'm a member of a large group on the that NIST is running on the Cybersecurity Coordination Task Group. It was a discussion actually at a conference call just earlier this morning about making sure that the data is encrypted when it goes out over the network as a way of helping to improve cybersecurity. Something that, frankly, when the internet was first thought of and brought up, was not a strong concern at that time. And we're obviously taking a lot of steps now to try to improve security on the internet and thinking toward the future of the internet, how that can be done even better.
Other panelists on that question, lessons learned from past experiences?
I do think we're in an all-new world in terms of vulnerability and needs around these matters, and it is one that is occupying a lot of folks' concerns.
Yeah, I would add, as Phil noted earlier, one size doesn't necessarily fit all for the solution, and there are critical infrastructure throughout the nation that clearly would need a special type of security level, different than perhaps some other aspects of the grid as it develops. Clearly for the security of the country and really for the benefit of the customers to not realize any events unnecessarily.
Let me, I'm seeing the 5-minute signal. Let me read two related questions from the audience. One is, do utilities have the right incentives to encourage less energy use? And the second question, which I think is related, is there a role for the FCC in ensuring and building confidence in smart metering deployments? And I think what these questions get to together is, what are the kind of high benefit ideas, strategies, initiatives that we should look at for potential inclusion in the FCC plan that would make a real difference in incentives for innovation, particularly for incentives for innovation around energy efficiency? I'll address that to anyone, maybe to each of you, and we can, if there aren't any other questions, we can use that to organize some of what we thought. And Bruce, you want to tackle it?
Yeah, so I'll take a first stab at this. First off, and I think it's been mentioned, Massachusetts, for instance, has introduced a decoupling mechanism whereby the utilities are not, basically not remunerated for additional sales.
And as a result, this decoupling mechanism really takes away any thought of the concept that, as we sell more power, we would generate income, because that's what the decoupling mechanism does. So things like that obviously are incentives that set up mechanisms whereby utilities do not focus on sales. From a broader perspective, it really boils down to stepping back and looking again at the utility and the regulatory aspects that there are, and recognizing that throughout the United States, each state has its own regulatory agency, and each utility is underneath that. So it's developing something that at a federal level would incentivize utilities, perhaps because other states don't have these mechanisms, to facilitate energy efficiency. And while the underlying principles of the regulatory model should drive that, there are some mechanisms which might be considered to move that forward. For instance, in this case, what I'm talking about is utilities have a responsibility to ensure that they provide safe and reliable power at reasonable cost to their customers. So to avoid cost, and I think, Phil, that's a great slide, and I love that slide. It talks about the 88 hours that the system is really using, a huge portion of the capacity. If you can avoid those 15% for that 1%, those 88 hours, obviously you can avoid making huge capital investments. You can avoid a lot of the inefficiencies that are realized in the system, and you can enhance the reliability of the system as well. So the underlying principle is there to do that. It's taking it to the next level and bringing that back to the utilities, that it is their responsibility to look at energy efficiency. And there are a number of different models throughout the United States, whether it's California, whether it's Massachusetts, that look at that. And I think the FCC can look at those and perhaps look and work with some of the regulators throughout the United States and really identify which ones have worked the best. I can't tell you which ones have worked the best, but clearly there's experience both in Massachusetts, East Coast, West Coast, throughout the United States. There are a lot of different state regulators to talk to, and perhaps utilities as well.
I think the idea of a clearinghouse for best ideas around communications, broadband, and energy and other areas is something that we're looking at. Let's keep going down the panel, and the question is about incentives for innovation, particularly around incentives or strategies using our broadband communications networks
Understood.
To incentivize innovation and energy efficiency.
Got it. And it's important to remember that the utilities of our nation are fundamentally franchised owners by the regulatory legal statutes that allow them to operate within those franchises. It's a very unique relationship between them and their end users. They are a monopoly. They need to be a monopoly. It doesn't make sense for us to duplicate and have competition from the operating of a distribution business, so to speak, or specifically. It's also important to note that about 80% of the assets that we're talking about here are actually under the purview of the states, not under the purview of the federal government. So this is very different than telecommunications or even interstate gas pipeline business, which the federal government's sway on this is very direct because of Chairman Wellinghoff at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and his colleagues can set lots of policy at the Fed side, and it touches everybody. On the state side, there are 50 states and 7 territories to have to deal with and have to figure out how to work within their circumstances. I do think of incentives as an important part of it, and as Bruce indicated, Massachusetts has a system of incentives that we can work through with utilities to reward them for good behavior. I do think penalties are also an interesting concept that we ought to think about from a regulatory standpoint. And if utilities aren't at certain levels in terms of innovativeness, or their end-use customers at a certain level of energy efficiency, that they should potentially be docked a little bit in terms of the returns that are going to be allowed to them. Because part of their responsibility as good citizens here is to move us forward to our new energy future. I'm not sure of the specific broadband-related innovations that we could really put in place and try and reward the local utilities for spurring. I do think it really is going to be largely in the hands of states, and it's a big challenge in figuring out both the national policies on this as well as the real state policies that have to get aligned with this as well.
Great, thank you.
A couple things came to mind, and trying to figure out how to tie it to the communications. But, you know, one of the things that smart grid does offer is better asset utilization. And is there a way to incent the utilities using smart grid, and communications is going to play a role in that, in better utilization of the existing infrastructure that they have out there, being able to understand where the load is at any given time, be able to move it around, avoid any investment that they may have to make because they're utilizing some smart grid technology and the communication infrastructure that would need to be in place for that. And one of the things that we struggle with at ISO, because we administer the wholesale power market, is there is a disconnect between wholesale and retail, and how do we incorporate at least enough of people with like real-time price response to be able to reap the benefits of some of the environmental policies that's in place, so that they're seeing either prices spike, or they're understanding that we're dispatching more efficient or less efficient generation, higher emissions into the environment, and can we somehow avoid having to bring on that more expensive, less efficient generation. That all involves having the communication infrastructure out there to move the data from us to them, from them to us. So there is that communication infrastructure that needs to be in place to make either better asset utilization or make the markets work better to get some of those environmental policies.
Congressman Markey talked about the electricity DNA, and it brought to my mind a picture of the electric industry intertwined with the communication industry in ways that they really have not been as much in the past. And it seems to me the incentives for bringing together those two industries, as well as, of course, with university researchers moving forward in a government-university private partnership, is where the incentives ought to be placed for the future. We're going to need that kind of partnership among these industries with universities and government if we're going to be successful with the future of the electric grid.
Thanks. We have a number of other questions about important topics and interesting topics, broadband over power lines, batteries, IP6 for smart grid. We didn't get any questions on chargers, but Congressman Markey and I agree that there's work to be done on energy efficiency and efficiency overall around chargers. The international component of this, let me say to each of the people who've submitted questions that our broadband team will see each of the questions and will look at them as part of the work of the plan, and there'll be opportunities for ongoing dialogue with the FCC and the broadband team on our website, broadband.gov. So I encourage that. And for now, let me thank, on behalf of my colleagues and Congressman Markey, the panel. Very helpful. Much more work to do, but we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us and to share your thoughts.
But we're moving the ability and the intelligence to control load to the edge of the grid. So there's plenty of opportunity there. Clean tech is now the biggest wedge in the venture capital pie. It is bigger than IT, it's bigger than life sciences. When we started in 2000, there was no such term as clean tech. So it's been interesting to watch this phenomenon take place. That being said, investments in smart grid-related technologies represent a very small bar on the bar chart of clean tech investments. So why is that when the opportunities seem so great? The problem is not the lack of technology. There's a lot of technology that was developed for the fiber optic grid that is highly transferable to the electric power grid. There are innovations from the silicon revolution of making things faster, smaller, digital, that are transferable to the electric power world as well. So the problem is not technology. The problem is cost recovery, because we've got a system that was designed to do a couple of things. And it was mentioned in the last panel. The electric power industry for 100 years has been incented to provide safe and reliable power at a reasonable price. So safety and reliability, not innovation, not coming up with the next greatest widget, but making sure that the thing works. And by and large, the grid has worked. I mean, there's some large numbers associated with inefficiencies due to power outages and things like that, but perhaps it suffers from working well enough that we haven't spent enough time and attention on it over the last few years. Also, we have associated for 100 years the electrification of America, the consumption of more electrons, with growth in GDP. And they did. They tracked. So now we're going through a transition where we're trying to say, let's keep our economy growing with using less electricity. That creates certain challenges, too. Where we believe that the hairball occurs is at the regulatory side. We do not have a regulatory system that's set up to accommodate a dynamic, interactive, transactive marketplace that the smart grid can actually provide. As has been said, the FERC can set prices for transmission and interstate commerce. As soon as the electron enters the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the PUC has jurisdiction. Massachusetts is part of a regional marketplace, power marketplace that includes eastern Canada down into Connecticut. There are resources that need to be deployed across state lines, but within those market lines, the cost recovery for which is very, very imperfect because the system is not set up to deal with it that way. So I'm going to use my time to set up kind of a bit of a provocative point of view here, which is the technology is there, the market's there, the entrepreneurial drive is there. We will only unlock the true potential of marrying the information economy with the energy economy when we get price signals lined up correctly for all consumers and give them the tools with which they can manage that variable price power.
Thank you. And we will come back to that. Adrian Tuck?
So my name's Adrian Tuck. Thank you for taking the time. I'm the CEO of a company called Tendril. My background prior to this was I helped start an MIT spin-out called Ember, who make a lot of the chips that are going into the smart grid today that communicate from the meter into the home. A little bit of background on Tendril. We're about a 4-year-old business based in Boulder, Colorado. And our core skills are around building software. And we have a software platform that links utilities and their back office systems all the way through to a new class of in-home devices that sit inside the home. So that's the game we're in. We're engaged with about 30 utilities, and they represent about 50% of the homes in North America. So we have two promises, like any network that talks to two different classes of people. For utilities, our promise is that if you open interactive dialogue with your consumers, you can be more efficient. That means you can reduce load during peak times. We've seen enough graphs on that today. You can improve the consumer experience, and you can deal with all of the future opportunities that are coming related to things like electric vehicles. For consumers, simple tools and information will allow you to consume less and to emit less. So that's broadly the set of promises that we deliver. We believe that the energy market is facing a very, very similar evolution to the one that was faced by the telecoms market in the last 20 years. I'm pleased to see the FCC here. I think most people would think that you guys did a pretty reasonable job regulating that process, and any help that you can give us here would be greatly appreciated. So what do we learn from that revolution? The first is we should be humble about our ability to predict the killer applications here. I think even my good friends at Google didn't predict Google, so we need to be careful about that. The second is platforms win, make layers and structures that allow innovation to happen at different layers. Third is open standards win. It's amazing to me how many times people forget that. Consumer pull will ultimately drive change. And finally, there are huge opportunities here and huge risks. And I think we should be willing to see large incumbent companies fail in this space and to allow this innovation to happen. And if we overprotect incumbent players in the space, we'll do that at the cost of innovation. So where do we fit with broadband? So our system essentially, as I mentioned, bridges the gap between the utility and their billing systems and the like, and a set of customer homes and all of the exciting array of devices that are emerging beyond the home. We're able to talk two ways into the home. The first is across these new smart meter networks. So we're able to, where a customer doesn't have broadband or a computer but does have a smart meter, we're able to talk across those networks. But secondly, there are somewhere around 50 to 60 million meters already in the ground in North America that talk a one-way language, that wake up every few seconds and chirp, and a van drives down your street once a month, and that's how your meter's read. And we're able to take advantage of those meters by putting a little box that the customer could just plug into their wall into the home, and then we send that information across the consumer-owned and provisioned broadband network back to our servers and onto the utility, so they can manage and provide smart grid services on existing metering infrastructure. And that's our fastest growing market. We have a big project. The two first projects in the country are here in Massachusetts and in Hopkinton and Newton, which goes live subject to DUP approval in the first part of next year. And we have another big project in St. Louis that does that. So we use existing broadband connections to take advantage of the fact that, or to compensate for the fact there isn't a smart meter in place. The second area that we use broadband is to augment the AMI networks, the smart meter networks. Those networks are, charitably speaking, high latency, low bandwidth networks, and so they're good for breeding meters. They're not good for providing consumer control, and so we can augment that with consumer and broadband. There are all sorts of things coming. The use of cell phones to interact with your energy consumption, the use of IPTV as that rolls out. We're rolling widgets, smart appliances, and the like that are moving to give consumers control. And a good example of a smart appliance. It's impossible to sell a dryer in the US that doesn't dry a standard load of clothes in 58 minutes or less. If you make your dryer dry clothes longer than that, you'll lose market share to other people who can do it in less than an hour. As Americans, we expect that. If you change the dryer settings automatically by sending a price signal to the dryer to change the drying from 58 minutes to an hour and 18 minutes, so add 20 minutes to the cycle, the dryer will consume half the energy in an hour and 18 minutes that it would do in 58 minutes to dry the same load of clothes. And that's a good example of how you can use price signals to change energy consumption inside a home without inconveniencing consumers too much. So we'd like to see innovation, basically driven through access to timely information. We believe that real-time information to consumers is important, not day-old information. We believe that utilities should be encouraged to offer choice to their consumers. We'd love to see choice in utilities as well. And we think that consumers should be given control over the data that sits in their networks and the devices that sit in their networks. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Dan Johnson.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. I will say, in watching the clock down here, 5 minutes goes by really quickly. So I'm going to be very brief introduction on my introduction. I'm the founder and CEO of Verisay. Actually was involved in the energy business as an investment banker for 14 years, where I was actively involved in financing large infrastructure, particularly power plants. So come at this with a background on financing energy as opposed to operating it on a day-to-day basis. Verisay, quick snapshot, is a leading provider of sustainability software, enabling our clients to measure, monitor, and manage, and you'll hear that as a recurring theme in our presentation, energy efficiency, energy reduction strategies, environmental compliance and carbon reduction strategies. We believe that sustainability actually defines how this virtuous circle works of understanding energy, emissions associated with that, and ultimately ties to the life cycle cost of a facility and those assets that consume energy, in those facilities. We are working today to leverage broadband to deliver behind-the-meter smart grid solutions focused specifically on commercial and industrial customers throughout both the United States as well as a strong presence in the UK and Europe, enabling, as this panel is discussing, the energy information economy. This is just a quick snapshot to show you that virtuous circle that we talked about. Energy is one piece, just one piece of the sustainability puzzle. What we'll talk about today is the use of broadband as it relates to energy. Key requirements, no boundaries, again, if from a policy perspective, to echo the comments from Tendril. We need open standards, we need platforms, and we need broadband capacity. That will drive ROI, that will drive adoption, that will drive savings, which will be reinvested in the business. We see, again, the virtuous circle being if you understand sites, energy-consuming assets in those sites, you have the best opportunity to leverage efficiencies across those sites, capturing the benefits of energy reduction and emission reductions. Here's a quick snapshot of the sites that we use broadband to touch today. Verisay, I'll apologize in advance for some of the shameless promotion. Verisay does touch over 60,000 users in 23,000 locations in the United States and a very strong presence in the UK, linking together 42 large multi-site owners that own a significant portion of energy-consuming assets. Just a quick list of some of the folks that we work with and help reduce their energy consumption and their emissions of carbon. I'll go quickly through this for those of you that don't know who Tesco is. They're the third largest global retailer, using our platforms to manage their enterprise across the globe. I could spend a lot of time here, but I will keep going in the interest of time. I'll give a quick disclaimer on this slide. I was looking at testimony from past FCC hearings, and I liked this slide so much that was provided by Trillian, I decided that we should use it or see it again. It graphically captures the value and benefit of increased broadband capacity and how it can be leveraged to enable the smart grid and the benefits of the smart grid. It's just a great, succinct way of seeing that the more bandwidth we have, the more capacity we will have to implement strategies to reduce energy use and reduce emissions. Solutions such as ours can be utilized to deliver very substantial savings. I talked about the virtuous circle of savings driving investment, driving adoption or accelerating adoption. We have very tangible examples, Fresh and Easy, which is the chain that Tesco is rolling out in the United States, in California. Just by implementing simple measuring, monitoring, and managing solutions, they're saving over $5.4 million in their 120 stores today. Similar reductions as we rolled out with a broad range of multi-site retailers. Significant and substantial savings can be delivered using broadband to measure, monitor, and manage the reduction in energy strategies. I'll wrap it up quickly by saying the key foundation in all of this is broadband and growing broadband capacity. It's the foundation of the smart grid. And as a hosted application, I would say it's the foundation of our company and how we deliver our solutions to our clients, allowing them to significantly reduce their energy consumption, typically somewhere between 8 and 10% per site. That allows them then to have a corresponding reduction in their fugitive emissions and carbon emissions related to that energy consumption. That also enables them to be have a customer-centric, site-centric ability to implement real-time price response and DR. Again, customer enablement, which is a common theme that you've heard today, and allows them to comply with their increasing focus on reducing greenhouse gases. We see a dramatic increase. We've seen it in the UK for a couple of years, but it seems as if carbon has suddenly is front of consciousness for many folks. Are they paying for carbon reductions today? Not as many as we'd hoped, but to be honest, if we can show them how their energy efficiency and energy reduction strategies can help them accomplish their carbon reduction strategies, that has a huge, huge impact on their embracing their approach and the very high ROI that they can achieve by using broadband to reduce energy consumption. Thanks.
Thanks to each of you. Let's turn to questions. Let's follow the same format. Commissioner Copps, you have
I've got two questions. The first one for the gentleman from Enrock. Have enough consumers been able to avail themselves of meters that we have any record of how that usage translates into reduced power bills?
I think there is academic data on that if customers can see how much they use, that there is a small but significant reduction in energy use simply by seeing how much they use, like in the range of 3 or 4%.
And then my second question would be for Chuck McDermott, and the question is sort of what do you think an FCC broadband plan should have to say about research and development as regards initiatives in the energy sector? You mentioned that the power companies have been on a different track in providing safe and reliable energy and kind of discouraging research and development, but in truth, just about every industry has been discouraged from doing research and development and innovation from the policies we've had for the last 8 or more years in the country, and because of the expectations of the investment community, where research and development hasn't risen very high in their scale of values. What do you think the FCC should? What road should we be going down? And are we talking about encouraging more private sector research or more government research or both, or are there some new models out there even that might be suggested, new kinds of partnerships to get some of this essential research done?
I think there's some very successful examples of public-private cooperative research, like in the DARPA program and some things like that. I think as relates to the broadband and its applicability in energy applications, I think the biggest thing that was mentioned in the last panel is this notion of standards and interoperability. Until we have that, we need a plug-and-play smart grid so that the hardware providers, like those out in the hallway, know how to design so that their products can be quickly deployed.
I think I will take the chair's advice in submitting some of my questions to myself. Interesting. Well, one of the observations, I was struck by what Mr. Tuck said about not overprotecting those who fail. As a former state commissioner, I hear that, and my initial thing is like, yes, unless one of the entities that fails happens to be someone you regulate. Just throwing that out there. But anyway, again, I'll say, no, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's part of the challenge in which we deal. So I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Okay, that's me. I want to go to something that was mentioned in the first panel, and then, Rick, I think you talked about it. Everybody's kind of talking about basically transparency is really an incentive for innovation. And this is really just kind of from my own lack of knowledge here. But first of all, can consumers actually have access to their own data, and are there gadgets out there that you can put on your own, that not a company does it, but actually a consumer can go do it? If how much are they, and is this something that I guess you don't want to micromanage electricity use, but you also don't want to let those who are less privileged, who can't afford to buy an expensive gadget, be left behind. So maybe you could just help educate me on those questions.
Well, maybe could I take a whack, and then I think Adrian has some very useful things to say here. Consumers can't necessarily see their own energy use, and that's part. Right now, if you have a traditional meter, unless you go out and read it yourself and remember and wrote down what you did last month, you really have no idea how much you used until you get the bill, and that bill comes 30 days later. So a number of the utilities, when they're automating the meter reading, they're suggesting that they take the data off the meter, take it back to their server, and then put it up on a website for you the next day. Well, that's better, but it's not nearly good enough to drive innovation. And Adrian has a stellar example of the foolishness of this in his own hometown, and I maybe let him tell the story.
So Rick's right. The most of the existing meters don't support an easy way to read them. There are things that you can clamp onto the meter, optical scanners and so on, that will provide some information in, but the user experience associated with those is that they're difficult to install and that they're not too reliable. So one of the big promises of the new meters is that they will offer real-time, or every 7 seconds or so, information about consumption to the homeowner. But only if the utility turns that capability on. And so most of the new meters that you see being deployed at the moment have the capability built in, but that functionality is not turned on. And so the way that the system works, as Rick pointed out, is that even though you have a smart meter in your home, you're reliant on the utility taking that information, cleaning it, and presenting it back to you. And what our studies are showing is that the consumers react well to real-time information. I flicked this light switch on, I saw this thing change in my price or in my consumption figures. And that information, that capability is currently being blocked for most of the smart meter deployments around today. And in some cases, for some good reasons, there are some concerns around security and so on. But we'll start to see rapid deployments in Texas, certainly, of that kind of capability. And that's driven in Texas because Texas is a competitive market. And so the retail energy providers there think a lot about customer acquisition and customer retention in ways that the people who don't fear competition don't think about.
I think we only have time for one more run down the panel. Let me take a question that we got about integrating broadband communications and energy delivery and turn it into a lightning round for each of you. You're each involved at the intersection of the information economy and the energy economy, broadband communications and energy. And between the four of you, you represent investment in the space and also deploying products and services. If you had to identify one step that could be taken that would make sense for us to look at as part of the broadband plan that would get you to double the investment you would make in this area than you otherwise would, or deploy twice as fast over whatever time frame you want to think about. But one thing, what would it be? It may have been something you already said, but what would it be?
So I would like to see, there are two quick things. One is increased coverage so that we can reach low-income families. It's cheaper to give low-income families broadband than it is to give them smart meters, and there are all sorts of associated benefits with that, so I'd like to see that. And the second is that those people who are building set-top capability or modem capability for broadband, I'd like to see them embed Zigbee chips inside those devices so they can natively talk to smart meters and provide a set of capabilities that otherwise I have to sell an additional box, which adds cost. It's a $3 or $4 chip, and if we could get those into modems, that would work very well.
Great. Thank you.
I would agree with coverage because I think some of the biggest problems about getting price transparency down to the residential level is more political than it is technical. And if all consumers, regardless of income, have access to the tools, I think that helps solve that problem.
2 votes for universal broadband.
Picking up on that same theme, the idea of we focus more in the commercial and industrial side of the equation. So coverage isn't as big an issue. What drives adoption for commercial, particularly commercial users, is what's the ROI. They're typically looking at how quickly they can recoup their investment, and to the extent that they have transparency of the information, and I'll call it a more open ability to affect or impact reductions that they benefit from their energy suppliers, that will drive ROI, that will drive adoption. That money will be then reinvested in further energy efficiencies.
Great. Thank you.
I believe I mentioned coverage in my earlier remarks, so continue that. But the other thing I'd suggest is, and I don't really fully I suggest that you try to coordinate with NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, because they are developing the open standards for the smart grid, and where those overlap with your jurisdiction, it would be really helpful to make sure that that's as coordinated as possible.
That's helpful, and I think we all heard the coordination theme raised on this panel and the last panel. Universality, covering both what we think of as deployment and also adoption and affordability, transparency. Extremely helpful. Any last questions for any of my colleagues? And if not, let me, on behalf of each of us, thank each of you for taking the time. Very important topic, very helpful. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Great. Very good.
Great question.